When a Pokemon evolves, you can't go back to its previous form. Once you have yourself a Garchomp, it'll never turn back into a Gabite. Devolution isn't a mechanic that exists in the main Pokemon games, but what if it was? Well, my name is Matt, and that's what Elias and I are going to explore today. Alright, let's get started.
What's up, I'm Elias, and de-evolution does exist in a few forms throughout the Pokemon franchise. The Devolve Orb is an item in the 3DS game Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Gates to Infinity. It forces all the enemies in the room to devolve. De-evolution is also part of the story of Super Mystery Dungeon, where you and your partner de-evolve multiple times throughout your playthrough. There are also de-evolution cards in the TCG, such as the Eeveelution cards from Rising Rivals. Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon have a Pokepower that allows them to devolve into Eevee at will. Then, if they evolve again later, their attacks on the evolution turn are powered up. Pretty cool mechanic.
Devolution also occasionally occurs in the anime, but mostly in dreams and alternate universes. The one exception is Silvally. Faba put a limiter mask on Silvally to turn it into Type Null. Eventually, Gladion stole it and evolved it back into Silvally. And of course, some Pokédex entries talk about Pokemon that can devolve. If a Shelter comes off of Slowbro's tail, this Goofus Maloofus devolves into Slowpoke. Speaking of Goofus Maloofus, Elias is currently wearing a pair of headphones upside down.
And backwards, check out the mic.
If one of Exeggutor's heads falls off, it'll just roll away and become an Execute again. But devolution isn't a gameplay element in the main series, so let's explore what that might be like.
If you could de-evolve your Pokemon at will, you would be able to backflip between branched evolutions whenever you want. So just as an example, you could be playing through a game with, say, a Gardevoir on your team. Eventually, you might look at your team and decide you need more physical attackers. Instead of going out and catching a different Pokemon, you could just devolve Gardevoir back into Kirlia and use a Dawnstone to turn it into Gallade instead. Or, if you weren't irredeemably lazy, go out, catch a Ralts, and evolve. The Indigo Disc DLC just dropped in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and it introduced Hydrapple, a new evolution to Applin and Diplin. We now have 5 apple Pokemon, and I'm not sure how to feel about that. I also can't eat raw apples because they make my ears itch.
This is true. This is true. We have talked about this.
Diplin is the first branched evolution that can evolve further, even though its counterparts can't. Flapple and Appleton don't have evolutions on their own, but if you have a Flapple or Appleton, de-evolution would be an alternative method to get yourself a fancy new Hydrapple. Instead of going out and catching another Applin or finding a Diplin raid, you can just devolve your old Apple Dragon and re-evolve it into Hydrapple. Or, if you're not irredeemably late,
depending on what game you're playing, you could also devolve Lycanroc to make sure you get the form you want. Rockruff can evolve into either the Midday or Midnight form if it has Keen-Eye, Vital Spirit, or Steadfast as its ability. It can only evolve into Midday form like in Rock in Pokemon Sun and Ultra Sun, and it can only become Midnight form in Pokemon Moon and Ultra Moon. But starting in Sword and Shield, you can get either form in either version. So if you accidentally evolve it during the wrong time of day, you can devolve Lycanroc to give yourself a second chance. I mean, you could also just reset your game, but don't worry about it. Smile. Unfortunately, if you have a Dusk form Lycanroc, you can't devolve it to get the Midday or Midnight forms. The only Rockruff that can evolve into Dusk form are the ones with the ability Own Tempo. This is a separate form of Rockruff from the game's code, meaning you can't change its ability to get the Midday form, for example. You either have the choice between Midday or Midnight forms, or it can only evolve to the Dusk form.
Scyther is well known for having the same base stat total as its evolutions Scizor and Kleavor. They all clock in with 500 stat points, but they're distributed differently. They also have different secondary typings, so they all play pretty differently from each other. So if you aren't sure whether you want to use Scyther or Scizor on your team, you would have the option to flip back and forth between them. But between you and me, you should probably just use Scizor. Bug Steel is an infinitely better type combination than Bug Flying. It's also worth noting that Scizor is a trade evolution, which is, you know, an eensy little problem. Scyther always has to hold a metal coat during the trade to evolve. So if you actually want to use a Scyther and Scizor in tandem with each other, you need a boatload of metal coats, and either 2 consoles or a very patient friend to trade with. Actually, you know what, that sounds awful. This section is cancelled. Next.
Another pair of branched Pokemon you couldn't swap between is Dustox and Beautifly. Wurmple's final evolution is based on its personality value in Gens 3 through 5, and its encryption constant since Gen 6. If the last digit of the number is less than 5, it evolves into Silcoon then Beautifly, and if it's 5 or higher, it'll become Cascoon then Dustox. Wasn't Silcoon like one of your favorite Pokemon for a while?
Yeah, I still have the cards.
The values that determine Wurmple's evolution are static, and there's no way to change them. That means if you catch a Wurmple and find out it evolves into Dustox, you would never be able to devolve it and turn it into Beautifly. And the same goes for Pokemon whose gender differences are treated as entirely different forms. If you have a male Lechonk, Basculin, or Esper, for example, you can never evolve them into a female Oinkologne, Basculegion, or Meowstic. No Pokemon is able to switch genders as of Gen 6.
De-evolving your Pokemon will allow you to learn level up moves sooner. Evolving your Pokemon as soon as possible doesn't have many drawbacks, but evolved Pokemon learn moves slower than their pre-evolutions. That's a topic Matt has covered in a previous video, so check that one out after this one, linked in the description. Let's say you're playing through Scarlet or Violet and you catch a Nacli early on. Naturally, most people will let it evolve into Garganacl as soon as it hits the required level of 38. The middle evolution next The middle evolution Salt stack learns Heavy Slam at level 41. But Giant Salt has to wait until level 44. Is that a huge difference? No, not really, but if you had the option to de-evolve Giant Salt back into a stack of Salt, you might decide to do that so you get Heavy Slam a little bit sooner. It's a small difference, but we thought it was worth pointing out. Just take it with a grain of salt.
For more videos like this, subscribe to MEPlaysGames, and stay tuned after the video for our podcast, MEPlaysGames. Today we'll be looking at Elias' copy of Pokemon Moon, and grading the Pokemon in his boxes.
De-evolving Pokemon would also make it a little easier to complete the Pokédex. If I catch a Goodra in a Terra Raid, for example, I'd have to breed it to get a Goomy egg, then level up that Goomy till it evolves into Sliggoo. But if devolution was a mechanic, I wouldn't have to do any of that nonsense. I could just hit the devolve button twice and get the Pokédex entries that way. You would also only need to catch one member of most branch evolution lines. Instead of catching 2 Slowpoke, for example, you could just catch one, evolve it into Slowbro for the Dex entry, then devolve it to get a Slowking to get the last one. Like I mentioned earlier though, Wurmple's evolution is set in stone based on a static number, so you still have to catch at least 2 members of the Wurmple line to complete your Dex.
One of the coolest applications of de-evolution would be giving certain Pokemon wider move pools. If a Pokemon is part of a branched evolution line, then it could borrow moves from its counterparts. For example, Gallade can learn Air Slash, but it's got a low special attack stat, so it's never going to use it. But Curlia's other evolution, Gardevoir, well, let's be honest, it probably wouldn't use that move either, but Gardevoir can't learn Air Slash. In any case, if for some reason you decided you wanted to use an Air Slash Gardevoir, you could evolve Curlia into Gallade first, teach it the move, then de-evolve it back into Curlia and level up to become a Gardevoir. Or you could just hack it in.
Yeah, play the game maybe.
Yeah. Play the game, catch the Pokemon. And there are plenty of other possible examples as well. Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, and Hitmontop are designed with different styles of fighting in mind, but if they could learn each other's moves through de-evolution, they'd have wider move pools to work with. Hitmonchan can learn the elemental punches, but the other Hitmons can't. And if you could de-evolve Hitmonchan back into Tyrogue, then Hitmonlee and Hitmontop would gain access to these moves as well. Huntail is a physical attacker first and foremost, but its special attack stat is also perfectly usable, so it can borrow the move Psychic from Gorbis via de-evolution.
But the biggest winners, as far as move pools go, would have to be the Eeveelutions. Since Eevee can evolve into 8 different Pokemon, all of its evolutions would gain a ton of new moves. The Fire type is weak to Water, Ground, and Rock, but Grass is super effective against all of those. So Flareon would greatly appreciate Grass type coverage, because it could threaten most Pokemon that have super effective stat to use against it. Unfortunately, the only Grass type move Flareon can learn is Trailblaze, which is pretty weak. There's also Hidden Power, but that move is also weak, and also not in the game anymore. You could make Grass its Terra type and use Terra Blast, but you have to Terrastalize before it becomes a Grass type move. Since you can only Terra once per game, that's not exactly an ideal option. But if the Eeveelutions could devolve, Flareon could borrow Seed Bomb or Leaf Blade from Leafeon.
And there's tons of other combinations you could come up with. Let's say you want to run a Psychic type coverage move on a Jolteon. All of the Eeveelutions can learn Stored Power, which can be pretty strong, but Psychic is more immediately threatening. So instead of evolving straight into Jolteon, you could evolve into Espeon, Umbreon, or Sylveon first, de-evolve back into Eevee, then use your Thunderstone. All 3 of these guys can learn Psychic, so Jolteon can borrow it from any one of them. Jolteon can also borrow Ice moves from Vaporeon or Glaceon to give itself Bolt Beam coverage without Terra Blast or Hidden Power.
Devolution could also have interesting applications for shiny Pokemon. Some Pokemon have completely different shinies compared to their evolutions, so if you happen to catch a fully evolved shiny, you might decide you'd rather have its pre-evolution because it looks nicer. Like Red Gyarados is cool and all. There's an air bubble in my... Like Red Gyarados is cool and all, for example, but I think I'd rather have a gold Magikarp. Devolution could also be interesting as a major theme in a Pokemon game. Maybe towards the end of the story, a legendaries go around and evolving Pokemon all willy-nilly. They could even have a signature move in battle that devolves the target, as long as they have a pre-evolution.
Well, that's all we got for today. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed yourself, and leave a comment with your own thoughts on de-evolution. We'll see you all next time. Good night, fellas. Sleep well.